All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from the Patreons. Lots of gems, lots of guys just meeting in the opium den, and lots of the powerful monkey grip taking his opponent down to his knees. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
Sifu, I'm wonderful. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It feels like it's been a minute since we did one of these.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Everyone's been traveling except me.
That's right. That's right.
Travelers.
Mikey and I are international men of mystery, or at least national men of mystery.
Yeah, very mysterious.
Somewhat.
So
right.
yeah, I just got back from Europe. I taught a Wing Chun seminar in Hungary.
Yeah.
And very successful, lots of fun.
Awesome.
Got to see one of my old mentors, Sifu Carson Lau, in Budapest. And also got to meet Sifu Della, who we'll also have on the podcast as well. So it was a weird week where all the Wing Chun peeps, all the WT peeps were in Hungary.
Right.
A week before Sifu Carson Lau and I got there, Grandmaster Ling Ting was there. And so, yeah, it was like, it was just a coincidence. Everyone is there doing seminars within like a 2-week period.
Love.
So that was fun. I was a little bit jet lagged last week, but now I'm back into the swing of things. And we are in a massive deficit as far as the episodes go.
How was that jet lag for you?
Jet lag's okay. But I'm more worried about not having any pre-recorded episodes for the next few weeks. On Monday, I had to do a live because we didn't have any episodes in the bag. We have an interview which needs some additional editing, and another interview in planning. But we are, because of my travels and whatnot, we are like behind. So we got to get caught up and record at least 2 or 3 episodes this week.
We'll make it happen, baby.
Absolutely. So just before we get started, a reminder that the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon, patreon.com/the Kung Fu Genius. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to episodes early, my Instagram subscriber reels. And for the higher levels of support, like $10, $15 upper echelons, we have other goodies. Like I have now these deep dives, these historical deep dives I'm going into, like critical deconstruction of Yip Man's mythology of the whole Wing Chun story. And I'm going to have more in the next few weeks coming out. And for people who don't want to support us on Patreon, you can support us right here on YouTube. We now have YouTube memberships. We have a couple lower tiers, lower echelons, which will guarantee you a response in the comments, and also potentially we'll take your idea as a episode, as an Ask Me Anything or an episode idea.
This guy wants to chime in.
I was just going to say, I think Dre learned the word echelon this week.
Yes, you can tell. He always uses his new words.
Absolutely.
But that's how you assimilate information.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
You have to practice.
He's also just learned the word assimilate, so you've given him 2 words.
Yes! Assimilate.
So if you want to support us, it's either on Patreon, patreon.com/the Kung Fu Genius, or right here on YouTube. So we have those memberships. They even have a $9.99 membership here on YouTube, which gives you access to those historical deep dives and whatnot. So I'm also contemplating, every month I do a theory and Q&A class live over Zoom. And people can get a monthly subscription. It's really cheap. It's like $12.99 a month. And you get the Zoom link. And then every month you can ask me any questions about Wing Chun, because the point of this podcast is to have discussion about Wing Chun, Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee, issues in Chinese martial arts. This podcast is not a demonstrational podcast, much to the chagrin of people who've been watching it for a few years. They're like,
yo, how do you do the bongs?
Yeah, how you gonna do bongs? So when are you gonna show that? As if in the previous 3 seasons, I ever did technical stuff in my podcast, right? It's like, that's what I do for a living.
That's what people are watching for.
The podcast is not the podcast is not how I earn a living. I thought there's a bit of a lack of serious discussion in the Chinese martial arts world. It's either all apologist. My secret Sifu could defeat any MMA fighter with his death touch and secret rooted stance stuff, or just, my style is the only style of Wing Chun and screw the rest. It's like you have like those 2 things as far as discussion. I thought, like, no, we can have some reasonable, open discussion, interviews, things like that. As far as teaching Wing Chun, I mean, that's what I do for a living. So if people want to learn Wing Chun from me, I do private training online.
Living the life.
We have the monthly theory Q&A class. So the link for that is in the description below if you want to join that. And that's really the chance to get technical questions answered. So I'm having a problem with bongs or packs out. How do I do this? How do I do that? That's really the place, either the online private training or the monthly theory Q&A class to get that if people are interested in that. And links for all that info is down there below. So we have another Patreon Ask Me Anything episode. So
we do.
What you got for me, Drake?
I have a question from Albert Bryant.
It's a new Patreon, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Albert Bryant's, I would love to hear about how good Yip Man was as a fighter and martial artist. Also, I would like to know, did Yip Man have any real fights?
It's a great question.
Thanks, Sifu Alex and Dre.
All right. He's already thanking you. I wonder how much contribution.
And Mikey. And
your contribution was
you
reading
totally
the question.
Added that, and he did not thank me. He has no idea.
I see it right here. I totally missed it on purpose.
Just like you used to see Dryson's questions, right?
Hey everyone, just want to let you know Wing Chun Illustrated is now offering a paperback edition through Amazon, reaching a larger global market. And no, they're not ditching the glossy magazine edition through MagCloud. You can now simply choose the version of this magazine you prefer and the one with the cheapest shipping wherever you live. Order your copy of Wing Chun Illustrated today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping for Prime members. Go and check that out.
That's a good question. Unfortunately, when it comes to historical issues like this, there are people who have heard stories about Yip Man's, fighting exploits, right? And then they will just say, yeah, of course. And then they will just say those stories as if it's the truth. And
because they were there.
Because they were there, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, we really don't know. There's a very, as far as historical methods are concerned, like I'm an absolute amateur, but I have read on the topic. Mm-hmm. And I feel that having read a little bit about it, I'm like, okay, maybe the one-eyed man in the land of the blind when it comes to the historical stuff in the Chinese martial arts world, because the moment you say there's no evidence to support this story, people get upset because it's like, no, but that's the story my Sifu told me, and that's the story I believe. How can you say and then they go, well, the story could have happened. Yeah, well, anything could have happened. All right, that doesn't mean that it did.
Possible in this world.
And when it comes to historical claims, if you don't have direct evidence that something is true or probable, you can only say, here is a story told by so-and-so. I don't know if it's true, but it's a story that's been told. But you can't go like, no, this absolutely happened. Because from my understanding, everything that happened to our Grandmaster Yip Man prior to him coming to Hong Kong, basically prior to 1949, is a bit of a mystery. Because according to Chan Chi Man, who I discussed this topic with, and also Buick Yip, who is a student of Choi Sung Tin, from the back in the 60s. So Buick, I think, was learning from Choi Sung Tin while Yip Man was still around. Wow. So he had has a lot of really interesting Yip Man stories. Because Yip Man fled mainland China, partially to avoid political persecution. Mm-hmm. He was a member of the Kuomintang Party, and when the communists won, you better get out.
So he was basically a fugitive in some.
Well, respect. I don't know if he was a fugitive because it's not entirely clear whether he just left to avoid, because for the communists, for all of their kind-heartedness, they don't like people not agreeing with them.
Oh man.
And despite their kind-heartedness in other aspects, they do not encourage free thought or dissension. All right. So whether he was directly targeted or whether it was just a matter of he just didn't agree with the party, he left. All right. As did many. Hong Kong was really a kind of a small fishing village for most of its history under the British colonial rule. Mm-hmm. That started to change already in the early 20th century. But once 1949 happened, you have a huge influx of immigrants from mainland China into Hong Kong. Yeah. So much so that, there were a lot of like shanty towns, and just to house a lot of these immigrants, or they moved to like the Kowloon walled city because there were just so many. And this is where then Hong Kong also absorbed a lot of different types of Chinese culture because, Chinese culture is not just one thing, right? Northern Chinese are different from Southern Chinese. Western Chinese have their own, the Hakka people have their own culture.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong started to become like a bit of as far as Chinese culture is concerned, a bit of a melting pot. And this, I believe, actually served Hong Kong very well in post-war Hong Kong as the economy started to grow, because now you have so many different types of Chinese working together in Hong Kong and building kind of a new, more multicultural, at least Chinese multicultural tapestry of what Hong Kong is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Grandmaster Yip Man, for all intents and purposes, was just another one of those immigrants who came in 1949, during this mass flood of migrants into Hong Kong. And so his original intention wasn't to teach, but he eventually, within a year, decided to teach because it was perhaps one of the only ways he could earn some money. But according to both...
What did he do before he started teaching? Like, what was that transition like?
When he first came?
Yeah.
So it's not entirely clear. I have heard, but I don't know if it's 100% true, that he was actually just doing menial labor.
Yeah.
Which if you can...
because this guy saw him.
Yeah, Li Man, his friend from
saw him sweeping
from Fatsan. But that then is also the legend. You know what I mean? The problem is that because a story is well subscribed to, doesn't mean that it's true. It's actually a logical fallacy just to say that because a lot of people believe in the Five Elders story, or a lot of people believe in a certain narrative about Yip Man. The number of subscribers a story has doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah,
it just means that that's the story that a lot of people believe. This is a really hard pill for Wing Chun people to swallow because they go, well, no, I mean, the consensus is that, the Five Elders and Moy and all this. Yeah, but the consensus.
Yeah, we all agree on it.
The consensus is not looking into this with any kind of veracity. They're just accepting it because it's part of the traditional history of our style. But to a certain degree, they've also just accepted a lot of the traditional history of Grandmaster Yip Man. He started at 11, he paid all these taels of silver to Chan Ma Shun, who didn't believe that the boy really had all that money. And then when he asked his parents, he really had used his savings and then took him on. And then, shortly after he passed away, and then the seeings Chung So taught him. And then at some point he goes to the States not the States. I'm thinking of Yip Man 4. At some point he goes to Hong Kong, and then he goes to school, and then he meets Leung Bik, the son of his Sigong, and learns a more refined style, and then goes back to Fatsan, and then a number of years later has to flee with the shirt on his back to Hong Kong, which he did via Macau, right? Because that's still attached to the landmass there, right? So he flees to Macau, which was a Portuguese colony, stays there for a short time, and then from Macau goes to Hong Kong.
Have you been to Macau, Mikey?
No. I really want to go, though.
Yeah.
I really
you
want
look
to.
like fun. You seem like someone
I'm planning on going to Macau when I go to Hong Kong this year.
Yeah, we should definitely do Macau this time, right?
Yes.
Mikey would thrive.
It's the kind of thing. Well, he's a colonialist.
He would thrive there.
I mean, listen to that accent. So anyway,
they would love him in Macau.
So besides those kind of story beats about when Yip Man started, about his family, about meeting Leung Bik, going back, fleeing, or whatever, we don't really know a whole lot much else. And according to both Buick Yip and to the late Chan Sifu, Yip Man was very reluctant to talk about his time pre-1949.
Buick Yip never trained with Yip Man?
No, he was Choi Sung Tin.
He was a peer.
Already said this. He was Choi Sung Tin's student, all right? But he was Choi Sung Tin's student at the time when Yip Man was still alive. So he was there, like, he's been there since Yip Man was around, all right? So he's got the older stories.
So you just knew him from, like, outside.
Well, I don't know. That's not what I said. You're always putting words in my mouth. It didn't say that. I said he was Choi Sung Tin's student. I would assume he probably did meet Yip Man, but he didn't tell me that, so I can't say that.
I see.
Okay? Because unlike other Wing Chun people with a podcast or other Wing Chun people who make videos, I will not assert a story I heard once as absolute fact until I have heard it maybe substantiated or retold from other sources, but other sources that are not repeating the story from the same place. Okay.
So
and then I'll say, okay, maybe
seafood.
Something like this, right? So I would assume he did meet Yip Man. All right. But whether he met him or not, these stories he also got from Choi Sung-tin. Choi Sung-tin was one of Yip Man's earliest students. So these are really the old stories. And they said that Yip Man was extremely reluctant to talk about his past prior to 1949. There are no photos that we have of Yip Man prior to 1949. The earliest photo we have, which I believe is the one where he's in the Western suit, that was taken for his Hong Kong ID card. He's in his 50s there. That's like the earliest photo we have of Yip Man. All right. We don't have Yip Man, and that photo was taken in Hong Kong. So we don't have any photos of Yip Man in Fatsan. So
Amazing.
for the first 50 years of his life, there are no photos. And then in the latter period, when he's in Hong Kong, there are a substantial amount of photos taken, especially compared to the first part of his life. So what we have is a dearth of actual information about Yip Man before 1949. What we have are little things that have trickled in, little dribs and drabs that maybe he told one student, or maybe he mentioned in the 2 interviews that he had with New Martial Hero. He just talks about what we could consider the lore of Yip Man, which is that he started under Chan Ma-shun when he was 11. He had to pay a bunch of taels of silver to join because Chan Ma-shun didn't really want to teach him. So he just set a really high fee to discourage the kid from joining. But then Yip Man, who came from a wealthy family and had saved money, came back with that amount.
And he's
right. And so those kind of beats, which kind of everyone knows, Yip Man did say that in the first New Martial Hero interview. And he talks about Chung-so, and he also mentions Chung-so in the narrative history that Yip Man wrote. Oddly enough, in the history that Yip Man wrote about the 5 elders and blah, 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 he doesn't mention Leung Bik in there, which is actually an interesting point. It doesn't disprove that Leung Bik existed or didn't exist or whatever, but it is an interesting point, okay? Because the historicity of Leung Bik has been called into question by some serious scholars.
Wow.
So the problem is we don't really know anything. Okay. And there's been some stories. I remember I met with one of Yip Man's middle period students. His surname is Lee. Not a very high profile student of Yip Man. His name is, I think, Lei Gunyam. I think Kinyam, something like that. I met him and his daughter, very lovely. And I asked him if he had ever heard any stories of Yip Man fighting. And he said, during the occupation of Japan and China, there was some Japanese soldier that got in Yip Man's face and held a gun, and then Yip Man hit him with a pole pie or something like that. Sounds cool.
It sounds cool.
But it also doesn't sound like it could be real. During the Japanese occupation, where they're there with guns, some Chinese guy is going to hit a Japanese soldier with double palms, and he's not going to get arrested, killed, or worse. So I don't know. There's a lot of there's a lot of stuff where it's like, are we now getting into that point where Wong Fei Hung is, where most of the so-called exploits of Wong Fei Hung are interwoven with 80 years of Hong Kong film stories about this guy. Where it's now we cannot discern between fact and fiction, right? It's happening a little bit with Bruce Lee, not to kind of beat on a dead horse, but the fact that channels like Beardy or Bruce Lee Real Fight Channel exist, where they are now mythologizing a lot of Bruce Lee's exploits and moving him more towards he was kind of like the guy he played in the movies as opposed to the person he was off camera.
Wow.
That we can start to actually see this kind of mytho-fiction building about Bruce Lee, which is why I think it's so important that we debunk this stuff right away, that we kind of put the brakes on it, because Bruce Lee was really fantastic and did so much in his lifetime that we don't need to start adding and making shit up, because that's then when the haters go, oh, you guys are saying he could beat up and do all this guy. It's like, no, let's stop going that route. Let's look at him as a real person, warts and all, because that's still great. Yip Man now, by virtue of the movies and the fact that we have a lot less information on Yip Man than we do Bruce Lee, he's now becoming mythologized into something he really wasn't. So it's already, in my opinion, already happened with Wong Fei-hung. Yes, the Hungar people can probably tell you some real Wong Fei-hung stories, but in the zeitgeist of Hong Kong, like film consumers and martial artists, they now, there's a very blurred line between the 100+ films made about Wong Fei-hung, who existed in reality, versus the real exploits of Wong Fei-hung. Now it's already muddled mytho-fiction. Bruce Lee is on his way there. And Yip Man, I think, is
right
already, no, I think he's already surpassed Bruce in the mytho-fiction era. Because people are still alive who knew Bruce, and we still have footage of Bruce off camera, like, which is weird to say footage of him off. I mean, when he's not, when he's just palling around with his buddies, so you can kind of see the real Bruce Lee, as opposed to the polished Pierre Burton interview one.
All right.
So, but Yip Man now, most of what people know seems to be like, the number of people who've walked into my school and go, did Yip Man really beat up 10 black belts just because it's in the first one? No, of course not. But now it's like, you have to answer that question, which for me is like, did the Ewoks really overcome the stormtroopers in the Battle of Endor?
Oh, yes, of course they did.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, wait, you're asking me if something in a movie really happens?
Right.
The default setting should be that it's all fiction. And then you find out, oh, well, that was based on something true. That was based on something true. Not just go, well, it's a movie about a guy named IP Man. It must all be true.
It's true.
So we really don't know, because Yip Man, and this is why there's been some speculation that maybe Yip Man had fled something a little bit more sinister. Of course, we don't know, like, some kind of persecution, some kind of more major thing. He didn't talk about it. And there is evidence, particularly on the Chinese version, the Chinese Wikipedia of Yip Man, that he also changed the spelling of his name, this whole IP thing. And on his card, it doesn't say Ip Man, it says Ip Yat. All right. When people always go like, oh no, he spelled his name IP Man, they always show that ID card, which they signed it IPYAT.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, it's a big elephant in the room. It's like, do you not see the second word is not man? And his full name was Yip Gai Man. Gai.
Right.
So it wasn't Yat Man. So his real name wasn't Ip Yat something. That Yat didn't exist at all. And everyone goes, it's the proof that he spelled it IP. And no one goes, is anyone going to mention the fact that it's Yat?
What's that Yat
on there? What is that about? Right. And according to the Chinese Wikipedia, he was somewhat fearful. I mean, again, this is speculation, but it could be reasonable. But I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it could be reasonable. That he was afraid that the Chinese would somehow try to come into Hong Kong and get him. All right. Which it's like, he didn't need to fear that. That kind of thing can only happen only after the handover now. Now, if you say something bad about China in Hong Kong, they can go in there, snatch you, and reprogram you, right? Like they did famously a bookstore owner a few years ago. There was a very famous case of a Hong Kong bookstore owner who sold a lot of books in his bookstore that were anti-mainland China. And he disappeared in Hong Kong. He was gone for what I believe were a few months. And it was pretty clear. The big speculation was the Chinese didn't like that he was selling books in Hong Kong, which is supposed to be a special administrative region. You're supposed to be able to do those. You're supposed to have freedom of speech and be able to sell this stuff. But China's slowly putting the manacles on Hong Kong. Well, not slowly anymore. And he disappeared. A bookstore owner in Hong Kong. Now, he's not in China. He's in Hong Kong. And a few months later, he came back and he was like, no, China is great. I love China. Go China. Like they had scrambled his brains.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah. I love China. We love China. China's great. All right.
Oh, no.
Please tell your future overlords how great they are. But Yip Man apparently was fearful of something like that back then. According to the Chinese Wikipedia, and it's difficult to say where that stuff comes from, I'm not even saying it's true, but I'm just saying there's stuff on Chinese websites that you don't normally read. Doesn't mean that it's true, by the way. It's just another narrative because of what Yip Man and Buick, Chan Chi Man and Buick Yip told me about Yip Man being very secretive about his past. And then the Wikipedia entry saying that he was fearful that maybe some people would come in from China and try to kidnap him or take him back. That he had done things like change his name, change the spelling of his name in official documents. Was a little, would not give out too much information of who he was for fear that maybe there was a spy in his school. So he wouldn't want to talk too much about, I was a member of the KMT party and stuff. So Buick Yip told me that Choi Seung-tin and maybe some of his classmates, while Yipman was in the toilet, they ran over to either his desk or to his jacket, and they grabbed his ID. And they were like snooping in his wallet, and they found his ID card as a policeman in mainland China.
Yeah.
Before the communists took over, which meant that he was like a KMT.
Okay.
And then I think that's when they kind of were like, so he was like a KMT, and then he left. But besides that story, like, I don't know, that might be the only way they found out, because he may have never said it.
Yeah.
So then everything else, if that's the only way they found out about this, then everything else that's ever come out about it is just speculation.
Okay.
Someone took a seed of that story and then built on it.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to indicate that, that Yipman himself talked about that at all.
Right.
All right. And so it also goes that a lot of his exploits and stories that weren't directly related to learning Wing Chun, he probably didn't talk too much about.
He may have talked about it with Tong Sun.
But that doesn't mean he did.
Speculation.
But that doesn't mean he did. He may have talked about it with any of his students, but that doesn't mean he did. The fact that something is probable doesn't mean that it happened. Or I should say, the fact that something could have happened doesn't mean that it did. And too much of Kung Fu history is like, well, it could have happened, so therefore it did. It's like, no. All right. There are a couple stories about Yip Man's fighting prowess, but again, like him using the Popeye Chung against the Japanese soldier, I don't believe that. In the middle of a sea of book, guns, he has there's some common folklore about Yip Man's fights. Like, there are a couple stories that all of his students tell, but again, it's most likely like 2 stories were told, and everyone else is just retelling the same stories. Okay. It doesn't mean that because everyone is telling the story, this is an independent verification that it existed. These are just people recycling the same stories. If you don't mind grabbing that Wing Chun Kun book off of the shelf.
So many people are confused about basics in Wing Chun Chi Sao. Some view it as a collection of moves, and masters confuse their own students by talking of principles and concepts without telling them what's what. The 15 Chi Sao Fundamentals is my attempt at explaining Wing Chun Chi Sao from a perspective of principles, but also with the basic techniques required to express those principles. It shows the framework for Hong Kong Wing Chun Chi Sao, in particular, the training of Pun Sao and Lap Da. This is necessary training before going on to the higher and more spontaneous expressions of Chi Sao. Right now, if you use the code KFG Chi Sao, you can get a signed copy of my book for the price of the unsigned one. Click on the link in the description below and use the code KFG Chi Sao at checkout to get a signed copy of this full-color, over 230-page manual on the vital foundational training exercise of Wing Chun. This offer is good while supplies last, so get yours today.
The big one, the yellow one. I have a couple versions of it. Yeah, this one I bought in Hong Kong in 1996.
The first trip?
Yeah, my first trip.
First trip.
All right. So I'm only going to read out of here, not because I'm bereft of content, but because I don't want to misquote anything, right? So there's a famous story which they actually allude to in Yip Man 1 with Donnie Yen, where there was like a gun that was held to him, and then he held the barrel, and he had such strength that the bullet, like the guy couldn't pull the trigger because he's holding it, and then he snaps it, and then the barrel comes out, right? And you see that in the first Yip Man movie, but that is apparently based on some story. Now again, is that story true? I don't know. All right, but it is a story that was told, and it did make its way into the Yip Man movie.
Is it possible, Mikey, to stunt a gun by holding a barrel a certain way?
So Yip Man was a police officer in Fatsan. That was one of his jobs. All right, people have talked about he just did it for fun because he didn't need money. So it's not like he was like Sherlock Yip. He just did it because he was bored.
That's
right?
the part I love.
And there's another story that his job at the police was just making sure the prostitutes had paid their taxes, right? But from whether that's true or the other story is true, it just seems whatever his job was at the Fatsan, Fatsan 911. It seemed it was a somewhat cushy job.
So my dad was an auxiliary cop, and I think he did it just for fun. So
possible,
yeah.
So anyway, there's one story that he's on the beat, and there's a parade in Fatsan with floats, and Sherlock Yip is on the prowl, right? And it says so. I'm gonna read this story because this is the story as told by Leung Teng, who probably heard it from his sifu or heard it from someone, right? So it says it was during one of these occasions in Fatsan that Yip Man and several young female relatives were among the spectators for the show. Okay, so he wasn't on the beat; he was watching the show. Standing not far away from them was a soldier. Yip Man had a special dislike of the soldier, bearing in mind that in those days, people who joined the services were either vagabonds or outlaws, and that the good youths, as people would say, would never become soldiers. Yip Man's female companions were luxuriously dressed, and their beauty and graceful manner attracted the attention of this particular soldier. So we have what's very clearly a very leftist Yip Man. Waving his fist at the establishment soldiers, bro. All right, but Yip Man as the Chinese hippie at that time, right?
Okay.
And but he's also rich. All right. Yip Man's female companions were luxurious. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the soldier who's and I love how it's like here's a stereotype of soldiers in China in that time, and we're just gonna go with it. You know what I mean? Like the Leung Teng retelling is like, people like only like vagabonds and troublemakers became soldiers. And that was totally true, bro. All right, we're just going to go with it. And we're going to ride with that, right? The soldier annoyed Yip Man as he approached them and insulted the ladies, speaking disrespectfully to them. Yip Man accused them of having bad manners and resulted in a fight between the two men. Which is, obviously this translation, this is a story. Maybe the story's true, maybe it's not. But I just like
it's possible Yip Man told him this story, right?
It's possible, but I don't know.
No.
All right. I have a feeling that these are like a basic story was told at some point, and everyone who's told it has embellished it and added a little bit to it.
Have you asked Leung Teng about this?
No, I didn't. Well, because to be fair to Leung Teng, he would just tell you, it's like, hey, it's in my book. That's the story right there, right?
Okay.
So I just like the soldier speaks disrespectfully to the ladies. and Yip Man, it's like, he just takes off his white glove. He's like, you, sir, have bad manners. Like, I just love, like, when we tell this story, I wish we had like an animator.
Right.
Because sometimes when we tell these stories, like the William Chung story, the history, like it would be so great if someone could just take these narrative stories and animate them. It would be hysterical, right? You, sir, have bad manners. Sorry, I hear him almost as like kind of a Southern gentleman or like a Mark Twain. You, sir, are very ill-mannered. All right, so so there was a fight between two. Yip Man was not the delicate scholar he expected. This infuriated the soldier, who drew his pistol and pointed it at Yip Man. At the critical moment, Yip Man wasted no time. He quickly snatched the pistol and knocked away the chamber of it with his powerful fingers, leaving the soldier standing frightened and dumbfounded. Before the soldier had time to recover from the shock, Yip Man and his companions were already gone. Which is...
So he stood there like...
But like, all right, whether there's a seed or kernel of truth to this story, the story is kind of funny.
It is.
He's like, okay, we're going to fight. So the soldier pulls out a gun, all right? Yip Man snatches the gun, just like someone points a gun, he just grabs it.
Yeah.
Like, please.
Powerful
and
fingers.
then uses his fingers, and then hands the gun back, and then the guy's so shocked, and while he's looking at his gun, Yip Man makes like a ninja and leaves.
But all of them.
All of them, right? So I imagine like Yip Man throws a smoke bomb on the floor and he just takes his gaggle of female relatives and they're gone. And it's like, ooh.
Soldiers like...
Look, I'm not saying that's something that couldn't have been a scuffle. Yip Man wrestled the gun from someone, knocked the thing out. If the story happened like this, I'm not too sure. Now, again, this is no disrespect on Yip Man.
Yeah.
Because when people go like, oh, you're being disrespectful about Yip Man, there's nothing to indicate Yip Man ever told this story.
Right.
This is written in a book. All right. We don't know where this story comes from. We don't know the origin of it. Yip Man never claimed this. All right. So when I read it, it comes off a bit fantastical.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
It's not to say that there's not a kernel of truth in there that maybe, and then the story becomes embellished like everything else. But it's a kind of a funny story. You mentioned the guy holding his gun, oh my God. And then he looks up and, man, everyone is gone. Wow.
Love it.
Right. Okay.
Love
so
it.
that was the, but Leung Ting himself writes in the final paragraph. This incident was later retold by many eyewitnesses, but with much exaggeration, even to the point of saying that Yip Man had broken the barrel of the pistol in 2 halves. In fact, Yip Man was only to be praised for the strength of his fingers and the speed of his actions. So the moral of the story is, details aside, Yip Man was really fast and has strong fingers.
Okay.
All right? That's the moral of the story.
You got to train those fingers.
All right. So then there was a story where he knocked down boxer Cam, all right, within 1 minute. All right. So in another incident, Yip Man was noted for his competence in a duel with a boxer by the name of Gamsan Mo from the Kangxi province in northern China.
All right.
So now he's fighting a northerner. All right. Which sounds a little bit like the story in Yip Man, the
like
northerner the guy who comes from the north to challenge, right? So it looks like maybe the writers of Yip Man 1 just took Leung Ting's book and kind of
there you go.
Put those beats in there, right?
Right.
And he arrived in Fatsan and was asked for the post of instructor in the Qingwu Athletic Association of Fatsan. Okay, so that's interesting because that somewhat dates the story.
Mm.
The Qingwu Academy was formed, I think, in the early 1900s, like in the teens, 13, 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
So Yip Man would be, in like his 20s at this time. Okay. 20s, early 30s, maybe. Right. Okay. If the story is even true. The directors of the Qingwu Athletic Association were reluctant to accept him, probably because he was a northerner. Nevertheless, he was invited to take part in a tournament to be held in the Fatsan Theater, in which he was to fight the famous Yip Man. So already, it's like, I'm not saying the story didn't happen, but like somebody moves from northern China to Fatsan, wants to become the head of the Fatsan Qingwu Academy, and then they're going to have a tournament, and Yip Man, who by all accounts is like a wealthy practitioner of martial arts, it's like, oh, sure, I'll fight him in a tournament. Yeah. All right. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm just saying, like,
we weren't there.
It seems, again, kind of, it seems like, it seems like fiction. All
okay.
Right. And so Yip Man at first refused to take part in such a public fight with a stranger, but at the earnest request of Lei Kwang Hoi, a famous herbalist physician of Fatsan, he eventually agreed to the fight. So Yip Man, young and feisty fighter Yip Man, doesn't want to fight this blowhard from the north. But then there's this herbalist.
You gotta love these
herbalist.
They're very persuasive.
A doctor of Chinese medicine, an herbalist.
Yeah. Those herbalists know how to peer pressure.
Yip Man, you really need to fight. You know why? Because if you get beat up, I can sell you a bunch of herbs.
I got you.
Right?
I got you.
Because we all know it's the herbalist physician that always goads people to fight.
Don't worry, man. You get hurt.
It's kind of ridiculous. If it's another martial arts guy, so whatever, like a famous herbalist physician. All right, yo, Yip, yo, bro, you got to go and fight this northerner, bro.
Right.
All right, and dude, if you get banged up, don't worry, I got some good tita chow for you in the back. All right. On the day of the tournament, spectators flocked to the theater where the fight was to be held. Mm-hmm. To the disappointment of all, Kem was knocked down by Yip Man only 1 minute after the commencement of the fight, which is funny because we consider
that's a long fight.
It's a long fight for a real fight. It's a long ass minute.
Standards,
long ass minute. Kem was declared. Kem was declared by the judge Tam Sheng-chi to be the loser. I love like the facts that are thrown in here. Like they know the judge's name. he was Tam Seong Chi, and they
But
know
that's
the
the
name of the
formula.
herbalist
That's the
who
formula.
goaded him. Yeah. And sometimes people, and this is similar things happen when people try to prove the historicity of certain religious things by the sheer amount of details and stuff. But sometimes those details are added in to make the story sound more plausible. We know the name of the judge. Well, how can we verify that was the name of the judge? Right? If the story is too vague, people are like, oh, it sounds like kind of a vague story. But if you throw in the name of the referee and the herbalist physician who goaded, the herbalist physician who has a penchant for watching fights and watching his friends get in fights, yo, you got to do it, bro. So again, so is the story true? Who the hell knows? All right. And then
Mikey knows.
Here's another one. A punch that knocked down the comedian of an opera troupe.
I love this.
All right. This is so great. All right. So the Louis C.K. of the opera troupe came up and got knocked down, right?
Already I'm loving that one.
The second time Yip Man fought for the fame of the Kung Fu Circle of Fatsan was a duel between him and the comedian of the Red Junk, which is funny because obviously Red Junk's a flat bottom boat usually used to transport people among shallow waters, often used to transport opera members, right?
Imagine if you have a really, really nice one of those and someone just goes, nice junk there.
Nice junk.
Nice junk.
Yeah, but without
Nice
context,
junk.
when you're like, him and a comedian of the Red Junk. Sounds like that's the name of like an improv troupe, right? Called the Red Junk, and it's some redheaded dude who runs it. All right. So the junk was at that time visiting Fatsan when the opera was not performing or when the show was over. The comedian of the troupe used to frequent a smoking den, a place where people of Fatsan could legally smoke opium, Leung Ting adds. Non-smokers also use it as a meeting place, whenever the comedian of the troupe went to the smoking den, he used to boast about his own kung fu skills. No doubt when he was high as hell on opium. Yo, my kung fu is so great.
Yeah.
He even once demonstrated his Phoenix Eye fist in front of the smokers, making a hole in the wall with just one punch. Okay. These are stories that are written here. They're kind of, but the funny thing is, bro, the story is taking place in an opium den. Okay.
Right.
And then I just imagine this opera actor who's a comedian, whether he's on the opium or not, he's in front of a bunch of opium-addled dudes who are like laying on the couch on their side. By the way, that's where the term "to be hip" comes from. Because when you smoked opium, you would be on your side on your hip. So people who were smoking opium were on the hip, and then it became the hip thing to do. And that's where actually hip comes from. So whenever you see people like in the old Chinese movies smoking opium, they're always on the side on the hip. And that's where the whole
hippie. What about hippie?
I don't know about that. All right.
Hippie.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not the etymology genius. All right. I just know that.
It's just like,
but you have to imagine
druggy.
Then this is why it would be so great if someone could animate this story.
Yeah.
There's like a bunch of like old dudes smoking opium. There's this comedian from the opera. Either he's on the opium or not. And he's talking about how great his kung fu is. Yeah. He's in the opium, punches a hole in the wall with his Phoenix Eye fist. Like, isn't the owner of the opium den going to be like, bro, you need to fix that freaking hole you put in the wall, right? Man. He's like, yo, check this out. Bam, yo. And everyone there is just like,
I'm just imagining like being in a 1980s crack house.
And they're just like all like,
everyone's high as a kite.
So it was in the smoking den that Yip Man encountered this man. Or we're not going to tell how Yip Man was in the smoking den, by the way. The man, being proud of his own skills, insisted on having a fight with Yip Man, who refused to accept the challenge. The fight would have never happened if it were not for the persistent urging of the meddlesome onlookers. Read. The dudes who were high as hell. Yo, bro, totally funny. Yo, dude, he made a hole in the wall, all right?
That's your wall?
Yeah, this is our opium den, man. You can't let that guy make holes in the wall. And then Yip Man put the opponent on the floor with only one punch, giving him a bleeding nose. So I want to know, was Yip Man on the opium at the time too?
Why
I have a
would he
feeling
be there?
if you could actually see this story.
Why would he be there if he's not on the
Well, Yip
opium?
Man had an opium habit.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah,
It's just,
why would
it's
he-
not, it's just like it carefully dilly-dallies around that fact here.
Is he like
Because
the
also, because Siva Langtang has that throwaway line. Non-smokers also used it as a meeting place. It's a throwaway line to imply that, well, maybe Yip Man was just meeting his buddies who are high as hell there.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You know where else are meeting places? Strip clubs.
Hey.
For Dre, maybe.
Yeah,
All right?
absolutely.
Hey.
I'm only going there for the beer.
Yeah.
Or the steak.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I love that.
So the spectators cheered Yip Man and asked him how he could win the fight so easily. And I'm thinking, because my opponent was high as fuck. All right. Yip Man told them, though, although the Phoenix Eye fist of the man was very powerful, in fact, the man had little knowledge of the techniques as used in fighting. That's why the man lost the fight. That was the last time the people of Fatsan saw the comedian of the red junk.
Oh, he stopped going.
He became like the sad Pagliacci of the troupe,
no.
right? Okay.
Oh, man.
You know that story where, the guy's at the therapist and he's going, about how awful his life is. And the therapist is like, well, I know the solutions. You need to go to the town square and watch the show and watch Pagliacci, the clown. And he's like, no, it's like, no, like, I'm so depressed or whatever. And he's like, no, just, if you go see Pagliacci, the clown, you'll feel much better. And at the end, the patient says, I am Pagliacci. All right. So I can imagine he goes, at the end, he goes, you got to see the comedian of the red junk. He'll cheer you up. But sir, I am the comedian of the red junk. And I lost the fight to Yip Man in the opium den. All right.
Sheesh.
So again, these stories are like, they come off as fiction, just in the narrative way, because fight stories aren't told this way in hindsight. Like, if, for example, if you were to tell a story of a challenge fight that happened in the past that you knew of, or you knew someone who was involved, you would tell the details would be much more matter of fact and straightforward. Like, this guy was constantly agitating this guy in newspapers, and finally they were in the same town. So, the guy showed up to a seminar, and then, it beat him up, and then, because he slapped him in the face, and then some guy pulled him off, and then he went and he punched, and then he got on top of him, and gave him a bunch of punches on the ground, and then they got broken apart, right? Okay. And I wasn't trying to describe the William Chung Emin thing. I was actually thinking about Hickson's famous fight on the beach versus the Luta Livre guy, right? But you would tell like that, it wouldn't be like, like all these like superfluous details of the names of the judges and like the setup and like, oh, let me tell you the history of the opium dens and everything like that, right? So there are a couple other stories in here. There's also like a famous story that, Yip Man was chasing someone and then like kicked the door while he's chasing someone, and then he was out on a ledge and he used his stance to keep from falling over. So there's like these stories like that are very common in kind of kung fu mytho fiction. They're stories of the Sifu, of course, winning challenge fights. But then there's always these stories of like the Sifu like holding something that a normal human couldn't hold because it's so heavy. And he held it, and he kept the child from falling on a ledge by holding that child at the end of a long pole with just one hand or something like that, right?
Okay.
And so there's always these like feat of strength stories. And I'm not saying they didn't happen, but if you look at the template of these kind of mythical fictions about Wong Fei Hong and Leung Jan and all this kind of stuff, they have a story about Leung Jan that there was like another challenger coming from another town to Fatsan, and then he was able to smash something, a Donggua or something like that, like a winter melon, and it was like very impressive. And then like Leung Jan went and hit it with a very soft slap, and nothing happened. And it was, and he said, cut it open. The inside of the melon was destroyed to show that his power had gone internally as opposed to like the external power. They're always these, and it's not to say that they didn't happen, but it's just curious that these same archetypes happen to all of these guys. There's like one or two, they won a challenge fight, and one or two like feats of strength, the fingers that broke the pistol, the stance that kept him from falling off the ledge. It's not to say that these things didn't happen, or that not saying Yip Man did not have fights or whatever. I'm just saying if Yip Man had actual fights, I don't think these are them. Okay.
Interesting.
The only story I know, which is actually not of a fight, but it's a little bit of Yip Man's mentality. Or I should say two things that Chan Chi Man told me. And I mentioned this before, but since we're on the topic, it's a good topic to talk about here. Because I asked Chan Sifu about like, what was Yip Man like? Did you ever see him get in a fight? Like, what was he like about like the other styles?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we actually have this maybe part of the video interview that I did with him. It's been a while since I watched the footage, but we have like 3 or 4 hours of Chan Sifu talking about everything. So this might be on there. He said that when they would go and have challenge fights with the other Kung Fu styles,
Mm-hmm.
when they would come back and they would tell Yip Man, like, oh, we had a fight. He said that his first reaction was always to scold them for getting into fights with other Kung Fu styles because this is going to cause rifts between the Wing Chun school and the other schools. And, we don't want to create problems and we don't want to have problems. And then after he had done his Confucian scholarly duty of reprimanding his students' improper behavior of fighting with other students of other martial arts styles, he would then say, okay, well, how did you guys do? You know what I mean? It was like it's like he gave lip service to scolding them, but then he'd be like, all right, so what happened? Did you win? Were there any problems?
Okay.
Is there any way we can improve or something like that, right? So it would seem that he had like kind of a tacit endorsement of them fighting, but very indirect, all right? Which I can kind of see. Chan Sifu told me that. And then another story happened, and I believe this was related to Wong Sun Leung, but maybe David Peterson knows better than me.
Okay.
It may not be a Wong Sun Leung related story, although I think it is a Wong Sun Leung related story. So Wong Sun Leung beat up some either a Sifu or someone relatively prominent guy within the Southern praying mantis style, whether it was Chiu or Zhao mantis, I don't know. I mean, they come from the same root anyway, but one of those. There was some scuffle that happened, and I believe Wong Sun Leung won. But the person that he beat, or the school, or like, I don't know the exact details. I would have to, maybe we have it on interview. I have to go back and watch it again. Was a member of some type of triad.
Okay.
And so then after this loss to Wong Sun Leung, had then kind of vowed retribution on Yip Man and the Wing Chun people. And this got back to Yip Man that like, hey, like maybe there are going to be some people that come over and fight, like some triad guys. And Chan Sifu said that Yip Man just opened the door and he said, whatever, let them come. Yeah. And that was a story Chan Sifu told me. He said he was there when it happened. And that Yip Man was like, don't even bother locking the door, leave the door open if they want to come, whatever.
Okay.
And he said that, you have to imagine that this is before Yip Man was famous. And so for them, Yip Man was just like their Sifu they were learning from. But these were like the moments where they would kind of see what he was like.
Oh, right.
And he was relatively fearless about triads potentially coming over. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that story is not true. Chan Sifu was very honest with me in all of his stories. When he didn't know things, he would say, I don't remember. When he didn't know something, he would say, I don't know that. So you always have to be careful when someone always has an answer for everything. And that answer is never, I don't know, or I'm not sure. The late Chan Sifu would always say, like, I don't know about that. I wasn't there for that. Okay. I didn't see that. Or I heard this, or I was there for this, so he would always be very honest when I would ask him stuff and he'd be like, no, I don't know if that's true because I wasn't there. So that gave me reason to believe that he was a much more honest interlocutor than other people that I discuss these things with. And he said he was there when that happened. So we do know that Yip Man was perhaps, we could speculate Yip Man was somewhat fearless in some ways, and somewhat encouraging of his students fighting, which might say something about his attitude and mindset when he was younger, although neither one of us are trained psychologists. So we have to do a short episode today because I have an appointment after this, right? I wanted to get to those 2 other Patreon questions.
I think we can probably get to one of them.
All right, let's do them real quick. Lightning rounds.
I'm just like, okay, I get the stories. They are amazing. And I get that, like, as far as the stuff that I've done as a bouncer, to me, they were amazing. Like, because you've taught them to me and they worked in real time.
Mhm.
And I'll be like, oh, that was amazing. But I'm sure to someone onlooking, we like, it looks so simple and whatever he
Right.
did was.
Didn't you
very-
just grab someone once, like use some kind of lapsow or something?
I
and
used the edge of the hand grab because they were fighting some guy it was a fight. They were trying to break up the fight forever.
Mhm.
I come over and I grab him.
He's in the
here.
monkey grip.
Yeah. And I take them outside and then the other bouncer was like, what was that?
How'd you pull that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What,
yeah.
what the hell? We couldn't.
Yeah, but that's the kind of story that in Chinese mythology would be like the powerful
Yeah.
monkey grip jutsu that
Yeah.
that brought the ferocious fighter to his
Right.
knees. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
it was so simple for me. And
Yeah.
in real time, I just did it.
Right.
But that wasn't the thing that was amazing to me. I just did it and it worked. But everyone was like, what was that?
Right.
Because
Right.
they were in such a scuffle.
Yes.
But the other stuff like that I did, I was just like, oh my God, that was amazing. But no one even batted an eye to it.
Right.
So
Right.
it was just
Maybe
like,
too subtle. Yeah.
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 So
But you could easily
I
see
get-
how the kind of the sausage of
These
these
things
stories
happens,
is made.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can do a lightning round on those questions.
Let's see. We got Jonathan Owens. Can you tell us what a daily class in the castle was like, and did it differ much from how Learn Ting ran his classes? And was there any particular part how these classes were ran that made an impact on your learning?
Okay, that's a great question.
Is that a speed round?
No, but I can answer
You
it very
got-
quickly.
Okay.
All right. I did a whole episode on Castle Stories. I did 2 episodes on Castle Stories.
Castle Stories.
So if you look at season 1, very early episode, I actually tell stories about when I went to Germany and what the training was like. And I talk about this in detail. We actually have an entire episode, 2 episodes, I think,
Yeah.
where I tell castle stories and
Season
talk
1.
a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are other episodes where I talk about the difference between the European and the Hong Kong style. But the short of it is, no, the way I learned at the castle and the structure of that training was very different from how Sifu Leung Ting taught either privately or his group classes. They're very different takes on how to teach Wing Chun and not the same at all.
You know
So, yeah.
what? We have to do a Castle Stories 3.
Maybe. All right. But
Maybe.
next question.
Roberto Santiago.
Mhm.
Question for Sifu Alex. What are the benefits, if any, of moving forward and side to side with the pigeon toe stance when executing punches as opposed to the traditional Western boxing footwork and movement?
We don't step forward in the pigeon-toed stance, and we don't move side to side in the pigeon-toed stance and fight. This is a difference.
In the fighting, right?
Yeah, this is a super technical question. So, like I said at the beginning of this episode, I don't really do technical questions on the podcast. This is something that is for the theory and Q&A
Theory.
class, because then I can demonstrate and I can also correct some
Is Roberto
ideas.
Santiago part of that mix?
He
that
actually
theory?
is. He actually is one of. Yeah,
he
so
can-
he can. So Roberto,
Yeah.
just ask that question during a
There
theory
you
class.
go,
All right,
Roberto.
that's not a podcast question.
Yes.
All right, cool. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. Support us on Patreon or right here with YouTube memberships. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
Perfect timing. Okay.
One take, Willie. Yeah, brother.